Morning, everyone. Aon Risk Solutions is pleased to sponsor today's general session where infrastructure ministers talk priorities. Aon is Canada's largest risk, insurance, and performance security firm, serving in a range of key advisory and transactional roles on virtually every P3 project to reach the domestic market, including such notables as the Eglinton Crosstown and Hurontario LRT, Metrolinx's RER packages, Ottawa's Confederation and Trillium line expansions, Montreal's REM, and the Champlain and Gordie Howe bridges. Our moderator this morning is Jennifer Aument, President of Transurban North America. Jennifer joined Transurban in 2006. She led the use of P3s for infrastructure funding in the United States, pioneering a number of innovative financing and technology strategies in the development of major transportation projects, including the $3 billion 495 and 95 express lanes in Virginia. Prior to joining Transurban, she worked for Bechtel Infrastructure to develop the Washington Metro Rail Silver Line. She's also a commissioner for the Virginia Port Authority, which oversees one of the largest shipping enterprises in the United States. Please join me in welcoming Jennifer and the panel.
Good morning. What a lucky job I have today to be here with the two of you. Minister McNaughton, Minister Crocker, it's a pleasure to be able to have this conversation with you today. I'll do brief introductions, although these two gentlemen need none. But we'll start with Minister Crocker. Mr. Crocker was elected to the House of Assembly in November 2014 in Trinity Bay de Verde. Since his swearing in, Mr. Crocker has served as the opposition critic for business and rural development, including the Research and Development Corporation. Mr. Crocker has been a tireless advocate for the people of the Covenaire, Trinity Bay de Verde, working hard to bring attention to critical infrastructure needs for the district. A former entrepreneur, he's also served as the executive assistant to Dwight Ball, the leader of the Liberal Party of Newfoundland and Labrador. Mr. Crocker was appointed to the Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture in December 2015 and appointed Minister of Transportation and Public Works on July 31st, 2017, and has had quite a journey since then, so we look forward to hearing about the efforts of the last year. Minister McNaughton, pleased to have you here today. Well known to this group, Minister McNaughton is a lifelong conservative and community leader. He is a 3-term MPP for the Lambton-Kent Middlesex. Growing up in Newbury in rural southwestern Ontario, the minister learned the value of hard work and community service by working in his family business. By the time he was 20, he was elected as Newbury councillor. He was subsequently re-elected 2 more times. Graduated from the Westervelt Business College and successfully completed executive program at the Richard Ivey School of Business at Western University. Sworn in as Ontario's Minister of Infrastructure in June 2018 and has gotten to work quickly as we've all watched. Previously served in numerous critical positions, most notably as official opposition critic for economic development. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's dive right in with a softball. Both of you have had a journey of public service. You're tackling now an infrastructure portfolio, and we know in this audience, infrastructure, they're tough issues. So before we get into what's happening in the 2 provinces, why do you do this? What led you to pursue this path of public service and to tackle an issue as tough as infrastructure? Minister McNaughton?
Sure. Well, thank you very much. First, I want to say just how honored I am to be here at the 26th annual conference. I had the honor of attending the opening dinner on Sunday night with the CEOs, and I told this the other night at the supper, but when I said that I was attending the C2P3 conference, my 5-year-old daughter asked if R2D2 was going to be here. She thought it was a Star Wars conference, but I'm honored to be here and thank the Canadian Council of Public-Private Partnerships for the invitation.
Now, you know we need more young women in the industry, so if she thinks that that's cool, just go with that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll put in a good word. Look, I got into politics primarily because we needed a change in Ontario, and I'm sure we'll talk about it. We have some significant structural deficit challenges in this province. I'm excited to take on the infrastructure file because we need to work with the private sector. We also need to work with the P3 model and our P3 partners to deliver timely infrastructure investments in the right place and at the right time, and deliver that smartly and efficiently for taxpayers.
Mr. Crocker, what drives you?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation to be a part of this panel. And as Minister McNaughton said, it is a privilege to be here this morning. But I think what really drives us is our children and our communities. And that's what drives any politician, no matter what your political stripe may be, to become involved. It's always about doing something better to try and bring your point forward and your community, no matter what that community is. And it's important we always remember that. But when you look at specific portfolios, transportation, and my transportation works in critical infrastructure, it's very important because it's, what we lay down for the future, whether it's a road or a hospital or a school. It's very important that we make sure that we have the necessary infrastructure as we go forward for future generations.
Great. Mr. McNaughton, you're a few months in now. Tell us what's working and what's not with the infrastructure portfolio in Ontario.
Well, you're right. We're 120 days in, not that anyone's counting. So I'm honored to announce and excited to announce today that our ministry and myself has launched a market sounding initiative to work with everyone in this room and global leaders around the world in the P3 model to look at how P3s work in Ontario, how we can improve the P3 model in the province to ensure that we're attracting investment, global interest, and just working together with our partners. So that's the biggest priority for us right now. We've been in listening mode for the first 4 months, working with municipal leaders, global leaders like the people in this room, and others to ensure that we deliver infrastructure in a timely manner and using the best resources, because in Ontario we're obviously competing within for those precious resources right now.
So, Mr. You mentioned this morning you were launching this to bring in the best thinking, not just in Canada, but around the world, in terms of putting that kind of thinking to work to solve Ontario's infrastructure challenges. What is the pitch? You have a lot of investors in the room. Why invest in Ontario?
Well, look, we've been sending a message to the world that Ontario is open for business again. We have a government now here that is concerned about getting the fiscal house in order. We're committed to investing in infrastructure. One of the things that we campaigned on, for example, was uploading the TTC and how that can allow for expansion here in the GTA of transit. So there's a number of initiatives that we've been taking on, but I think most importantly it's that we're sending this signal that Ontario is open for business.
Okay. Mr. Crocker, you've sent a couple of key signals in the last year with the review of P3, the required analysis of P3 for major projects. Talk a little bit about this past year. What are your priorities as you stand right now, and where do P3s fit in?
Well, really, when we formed a government in 2015, we were very clear that we're going to lay out a 5-year plan for not only critical infrastructure, but roads and other infrastructure. And I think one of the things that when you lay out a plan, you not only signal to your constituents or to, in our case, the province, how we're going to move forward, but you also signal to the people in this room that here's our plan and we're going to stick to this. And one of the biggest things I think early on that we seen was the industry was, no, you're not going to stick to a plan. You're a government. Governments never stick to a plan. But what we've done is stick to a plan. And I think that really brings us down a critical path in moving forward that, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do this project this year. And we've budgeted that way in our fiscal forecast to make sure that, as we go forward, it's very clear to everybody how we're going to build infrastructure in our province.
Yeah. So you talk about that prudent fiscal management. A lot of great ideas, a lot of challenges to solve, a lot of workers to put to work. But at the end of the day, the fiscal challenges are a key obstacle. what does that landscape look like, and how do we overcome that to be able to meet some of these transportation needs?
Well, I guess, you know, it would be no surprise to anybody in this room, as a province, we've went through a fairly rough fiscal time with the decline in oil prices. But the reality is, you know, I think when you have to do with less, you know, to do more with less, it's when you bring in the people that do it, you know, the best, and that is in the private sector. And we have a, you know, a very strong public service in our province that work well, and our public service, I think, excels with dealing with the private sector, and you know, it's doing more with less. One of the favorite types of, you know, I joked about this earlier this morning. One of the most popular types of maintenance in government is deferred, and and as we go forward, you know, bringing in work with the private sector is really a way that any government facing, I guess, even in good fiscal times, you know, we had tremendous fiscal strength, I guess, you know, in the last decade in our province, but, you know, we didn't, I guess when money is easy, you don't look for ways to do more with less. So I think fiscal restraints actually create an opportunity to do better.
Mr. McNaughton, how's the fiscal situation shaping your thinking?
Well, it certainly is having an impact on the decisions. I think, you know, with a deficit that's now north of $15 billion, it's important as a government that we set priorities. You know, as Minister Crocker said, working with the private sector is going to be very important to deliver important infrastructure projects across the province. That's why today, launching the market sounding initiative to further strengthen the P3 model. I think we need to, as a government, continue to look how we can improve that model, as well as other things across government. So for us, it's about you know, dealing with the fiscal situation, but we also, as Joe mentioned from LIUNA ahead of this presentation, we know how important infrastructure is to the overall economy, to creating jobs. So we have, you know, we have to ensure that we spend wisely, as well as have a pro-growth agenda, and infrastructure plays a key part in that.
So our colleague at LIUNA talked about P3s enabling projects to get built that might not otherwise be built. You're both clearly thinking long-term in fiscal management. How can P3s play a role in creating better budget predictability when you're looking at the life cycle of your transportation network?
Well, I can say just on the life cycle, I mean, it's very important, and I often think about the office where our ministry is located at 900 Bay Street, the old McDonald block for those in Toronto. That building was built 40 years ago through, I'm assuming, a more traditional model. And the reason why I think P3s are great is because when those assets are handed back to the government, they're in good, solid condition, as well as it's very predictable for the government from a cost perspective.
Mr. Crocker?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It comes back to my earlier comment about maintenance. Government has never done a great job in maintaining its infrastructure, and I think you'd find that in any jurisdiction across the world, maybe. And the more that we can do with the private sector and those assets, when they come back, whether it's 30 years or 35 or 40 years, they come back in a like new form. And it's important because that really extends the life of infrastructure. Because if you think about the slide from earlier this morning, you know, reference to the amount of infrastructure that's aging in this country, it's important that we maintain it. And let's be honest, governments don't do a good job at maintaining their infrastructure.
So while you're at work at the provinces, the federal government has come up with a long-term plan. What do we think?
Well, actually, Minister Crocker and I were together about a month ago in Halifax at the federal, provincial, territorial meeting where we met with Federal Minister Champagne. We have a good working relationship with Minister Champagne. I've spent really 120 days listening to our key partners on infrastructure, beginning 2 weeks on the job, going to Ottawa and meeting with our municipal partners. One of the things that I heard from our municipalities in Ontario that they had concerns with the reporting and application process, a lot of burdensome red tape, as well as they'd like to see some more flexibility in the federal-provincial streams. I think that all the provinces and territories were on board with Ontario's message that we delivered in Halifax. I think Minister Champagne was very responsive to those needs and those concerns by our municipality, so we'll continue to push from those angles to ensure that money's being spent in the best way possible.
Mr. Crocker, what's the most important change, do you think, required?
Well, I think in the program itself, and you know, we have a good working relationship with the federal government, but I think, and back to Minister's comment, you know, really what was delivered in Halifax was around red tape and delivery. But the other thing, as a smaller jurisdiction, flexibility is key for us. It's absolute key. For example, I think about 20% of the federal dollars in the program for us as a province is in public transit. And if you really look at a province of 500,000 people, public transit is a priority for us. Certainly don't get me wrong, but the reality is we need flexibility in the programming, and that's something that we've talked to the federal minister about and lobbied and will continue to lobby. It's a great investment in our province and in the country, but I think when we come to the table as individual provinces, our different needs have to be addressed in a very flexible way.
Mr. McNaughton, while we're still talking about priorities, Mr. Crocker mentioned transit versus highway improvements and other infrastructure improvements. What's that mix look like in Ontario as you're looking at your program?
Well, certainly I said in the last election, Premier Ford was quite clear, and our ministry and the Ministry of Transportation has been working on the upload of the TTC and beginning that process, so then we can work on expanding that network. So transit's going to be very important, and as Joe said from Leuna, there's a number of municipalities across Ontario that's a priority for them. But in Ontario, there's a whole host of priorities. 2 weeks ago, the Premier and I were at West Park, where we announced a new $1.2 billion hospital, a P3 project, going to add another 52 beds to that community. Yesterday, I was in St. Thomas, where Infrastructure Ontario loaned the municipality $10 million to build 36 soccer fields. So there's a whole host, but healthcare, transit, education, top priorities for our government.
Great. We've a lot of discussion over the last couple of days about the new National Infrastructure Bank. What role do you see that bank playing in helping to meet some of these needs?
I think it's a very important role, and I think, again, from province to province, you'll find different priorities and different, sizes of priorities. For us as a province, really the thing that we see the infrastructure bank for us, and this is, very much, I guess, a sort of a future project, one that we really see important to us as a province. And it's, a lot of people would think the idea is sort of far-reaching, but a fixed link. Like, we can be joined to Canada for estimates around $2 billion. We could have a fixed link, and finally our country could be connected from coast to coast to coast. And but that's one that we see certainly a need for a partnership with private industry. And we think that there's a role for the bank here, and we will continue to lobby the bank for that project. It's certainly one that we see as going forward, a very important project for our province and the country.
We certainly are excited about the infrastructure bank. We're looking forward to learning more on how the bank can invest in Ontario and provide opportunity from an infrastructure investment standpoint in Ontario. I was with Pierre from the bank on a Sunday night, and I know we're going to get together in the next 2 or 3 weeks to discuss this further, but I certainly think there's a lot of opportunity for Ontario.
So what early advice would you both provide, and as they're looking at how to interface with the provincial level, how best to understand the priorities that you're tackling, what advice would you give them at this early stage?
Well, to the bank specifically, you know, it's about working together and about talking about the priorities that our government has and find the alignment between the bank and our government's priorities, particularly with transit and specifically here in the GTA.
Advice from Minister?
No, for certain, exactly. Just, I guess the bank needs to listen to what would be priorities for regionally, provincially, and nationally. And I think that would be very important to get the bank off to a good start.
Minister Crocker, could we dive a little bit deeper into a approach that you have in Newfoundland where you're actually requiring an analysis of a P3 for major projects? How is that working? What's driving that approach?
Well, I think one of the things we needed to do very early on in being new to the P3 game was proving to the taxpayer that this was the best road. And so we've done value for money on all of our projects. And we've found anywhere between 7, I think, and 13% over the lifespan of the project in savings. And that's very important. And back to the earlier comments this morning around the union aspect, we have had challenges in our province from the public service unions, primarily about, you know, privatization. But it's not about privatization. You know, as a province, we've committed that the workers inside the bricks and mortar will be public servants. But, you know, we want to work with private industry to build the bricks and mortar.
To what extent does that analysis help with that education gap that our colleague talked about earlier today in terms of value for taxpayers? Is that tool working to help underscore that value?
I think it is, but I think the reality is, you know, time will be, I guess, the evidence or the proof that this is going to work, and you know, and that'll be decades away before it's truly proven. But you know, we bring in the private sector to actually do this analysis. The private sector does the analysis and says, "Here's your value for money," and it's much better to the taxpayer. And it comes back to, I guess, our earlier conversation about being fiscally prudent. It's really about taxpayers' dollars and how we best spend them. And when a third party can come in and tell us that, you know, you're going to save 10% over, you know, the next 30 years by doing it this way, that's, you know, that's what the taxpayers not only want, but what they deserve.
So, Mr. Crocker mentioned that they're new to the P3 game, I think, to use your words. Ontario, not so new. One of the most established markets in the world when it comes to P3s. What lessons has Ontario learned on P3s that you're bringing to move your agenda forward now?
Well, we've certainly learned a lot from the people in this room and other global leaders around the world, and we're embarking on this market sounding initiative to, as I said earlier, just see how we can improve the model. We look forward to working with those global leaders to ensure that, as I said, we can attract more international and global interests and more competition in the P3 model.
So, Mr. Crocker, as you're really getting into moving these projects forward, we've talked about the analysis, we've talked about value for money, but you now already, a year in, have projects in that development and delivery stage. How's that going? Can you tell us a little bit about this project and how the actual implementation is working? Well,
our first project that we're actually delivering on right now is a long-term care facility on the west coast of the province, and we've planned out that, you know, the next projects, like right now we're in the planning for an acute care hospital, a new mental health and addictions facility, more long-term care. But I guess it comes back to, you know, our rolling 5-year plan. And putting out a plan very early on, and with, you know, tremendous support from our public service and our senior people in the department. You know, by having a plan, you not only signal to the people, you know, your constituents, but industry, that here's what we're going to do and here's how we're going to do it. So, you know, we've done really well to this point, I would think, with delivering on our initiatives in the P3 area. And you know, it's been successful because of the dedication and the way that we've set out an agenda on how we're going to do it.
So it's moved forward quite quickly in terms of pulling that together. What was your secret there? How did you get the team on board?
I
What's
think
led to that
was a
pace?
focus from Premier Ball right on down. The Premier said very early on, and when he was opposition leader, he had a plan. This is the way that we wanted to bring the transparency to government, and part of the transparency was laying out a plan. So by doing that, you get away from, to some extent, political agendas and moving projects because, well, it's not politically favorable at a certain time, and you bring it to a situation where it's there. You say you're going to do it, and you deliver on it. And I think that's why we've been successful early on, and with a very willing public service to actually get projects out the door and just get it done.
Yeah. So, Mr. McNaughton, you talked about being in the listening phase right now. Only a few months in, but can we put you on the spot a little bit in terms of, major projects that you see on the agenda in Ontario?
Sure. I mean, I talked already about, a couple weeks ago announcing a new hospital at West Park, $1.2 billion. Mentioned that transit's going to be a priority. The uploading of the TTC is obviously a big undertaking for the province. That process is just getting underway. Of course, look forward to working with Infrastructure Ontario to roll out in the time ahead the pipeline, which a lot of people I know are interested in this room. But really, it is about listening. It's about this market sounding initiative. It's working with all of our partners and the federal government as well on the federal provincial infrastructure program. So we're certainly, we want people to know that infrastructure is a priority for our province. The Premier talked about it a lot during the campaign, and I certainly have in the last 120 days ensured people that that's a priority for our government.
If I could just add for a second, the other reason I think that we've been able to deliver on our plan is the willingness of industry, the willingness of people in this room to actually want to deliver these projects. And, industry takes a great pride in doing things, on time and on budget. And I think it's very much to be complimented that some of the reasons for our success would be the industry itself in coming in.
So we'll tell you, when in our industry, we always say that there's a lot easier ways to make money, right? People in our industry really are driven by trying to they really want to deliver high impact projects. It's a passionate crew, typically in our space. So talk to me a little bit about the electorate a bit in this issue. So for those of us who've developed big transportation projects, we know that it's as much about politics as it is about concrete and steel. How does your electorate look at transportation? Are they putting it at the top of their list? Where is it in their order? I'm from the U.S. We're having a big election today. A lot of people making decisions. What's been your experience with the electorate in your provinces, and how high do they rate this issue?
On transit specifically, I mean, it's top of mind. I know our MPPs and fellow cabinet ministers, especially from the GTA, when they're knocking on doors, when they're out at the local coffee shop in the morning, this is what people are talking about. It's about congestion. And I often say that infrastructure is for the people. It's about the roads that get us home to our families at night. It's the hospitals that our parents go to for healthcare or our kids are born in. It is very important, and it is a top priority. In Ontario, fortunately, I believe people are strongly supportive of the P3 model. When I'm challenged, quite frankly, I tell people if it's not for the private sector being involved, then in a lot of cases, the infrastructure won't get built. So that's why we've gone back out to work with people in this room to get that process improved upon so we can deliver for the people and meet the priorities that the people want.
I think infrastructure is really number one, whether it's transit or whether it's a road in a rural community. It's the one thing I think that affects everybody every day. If you think about education, really it affects us as parents while our kids are in school. If you look at healthcare, it affects us when we need it. But there's one thing that we all do every day, and that's transportation in some shape or another. So I think it's number one on most agendas. And as a politician, I think it's one of the things we hear about the most. You know, we hear about issues regarding healthcare and education and other important public services, but it's one that affects us every single day. And the whole agenda of governments is about, you know, listening to people, but, you know, delivering on what they need, and infrastructure is certainly a key.
Well, you talk about the private sector and assuring your constituents that the projects might not happen without the private sector's involvement. There are a lot of people in this room that want to work in both of your provinces. They want to find opportunities to do projects. What advice would you give the private sector on working with government? What have you seen work well and not work well in that space?
Well, I would certainly invite everyone in this room to participate in our market sounding initiative that we announced today. We're quite excited about that. We will, as I said earlier, roll out our pipeline soon, which will send a signal where our priorities are. And you know, we've sent this message that Ontario is open for business, and we know that we have to transform the way government is delivered to the people. We have this structural deficit in the province, a deficit that's over $15 billion. The presentation below shows you know, where the debt's going in the province. And of course, we also know where interest rates are going, and that's a challenge for the government. I mean, in Ontario, for every 1% increase, that's $500 million per year in interest payments. So that's the fiscal situation. That's the reality of where we are in Ontario. So we have to work with the private sector in order to deliver infrastructure for the people.
Mr. Crocker, advice for this crowd?
I guess from our province's standpoint would be, you know, look at our plan. Our plan is out there, and we're going to continue to delivering on that plan. And, you know, I think from what we've seen from our value for money and other analysis that we've done is we're very much excited to work with the private sector to deliver these projects, and we're going to continue to do so. You know, even though we're, I guess, new to the market and the new kid on the block in lots of ways, you know, it's something that as a small province is very important, and I think it's very much a way forward for us to deliver the critical infrastructure that we need, and, you know, project after project. So, you know, we're going to continue to work with the people in this room and deliver more P3 projects in the future.
Right. Well, you talk about the future, and we always say this has to be the most exciting time to be in transportation, because from autonomous vehicles to drones to an entirely different approach. At Transurban, we now have 40% of our workforce are technology professionals as we prepare for what this next generation of transportation looks like. So as you look at your portfolios, are we seeing flying taxis in Newfoundland or Ontario? What does that future look like as you're thinking long term?
Well, I'm seeing a fixed link with the rest of the country. I think that's something that it's deliverable. You know, if you look at other countries in the world, if you look at Norway, you know, tunnels under the sea are not, you know, futuristic flying taxis. Back to your comment, but you know, there is opportunities here to do a lot of things, and you know, it's important that as we go forward, we make those critical investments in transit, in transportation, and just connectivity.
Yep. Flying taxis in Ontario?
Well, I have the beauty of punting some of these questions to the Minister of Transportation because I hold the infrastructure banner. But look, we approach infrastructure. It's about, you know, making the right investments at the right time. It's a comprehensive approach that we're taking in Ontario. Transit is a big priority. Expanding transit in the GTA will be a focus of our government.
Yeah. Well, as you look, and we'll wrap up here in a few minutes, but as you look at attracting you know, economic development, attracting major employers, we've just made our first investment in Canada, very pleased to do that. How important is your infrastructure agenda in pulling those employers into your provinces and helping to spur economic development and growth?
Well, it's critical. I mean, in Ontario, we've had a number of years of approximately 2% growth. And we need more growth. We need to have a pro-growth agenda, which we have under Premier Ford now in Ontario. Infrastructure plays a critical part. The economic spin-off is $6 per dollar spent on infrastructure, so it's going to play a very important role in terms of economic development in our province.
Yeah, I think just to go back to an earlier question with regards to fiscal challenges in provinces, but investing in infrastructure is never a bad thing. Good economy, poor economy, it brings jobs, it brings opportunity, it brings critical investment at times when investment is necessary. And not only, I guess the other side of that is sometimes in a weak economy, you get better value for your money. And I know the people in this room, are very competitive in what they do. So in lots of cases, this investment in times of, fiscal restraint is very important.
So to finish up, I'll just leave it to the both of you. You've talked about pulling your programs together. You've talked about listening to the private sector. You talked about bringing the best thinking to your provinces, prudent fiscal management. Anything else that you want to leave with this audience today? And as you look forward to your agenda and prioritizing, anything you want to share as we close?
Well, I guess a general thank you to the audience and to the industry, because they've been very helpful to us as we've moved our agenda forward rather quickly, and there's been a lot of good support out there from the people in this room on how you get to where we need to be and where we've been, and coupled with our public service, we're in a very much stronger position when it comes to P3s, and it's proven out well, because one thing in politics you can always do is judge success by the noise in the room, and I can tell you, we're not hearing a lot in our province about the way that we're delivering on infrastructure, only in a positive way, and typically in politics, that's not what you hear. You hear the bad story in politics more often than the good story, and the lack of conversation around the way we're delivering our infrastructure is a compliment to the people in this room, whether it's public or private.
Mr. McNaughton?
Well, I would say it's great to be up on a panel with, I think, two people who have come from the private sector into government. I've often talked about the importance of the private sector delivering services. The P3 model has been a good one. We're obviously embarking on ways of improving it. But my message is that in Ontario, we're open for business. We're looking forward to working with everyone in this room and people around the world to make Ontario a better place to invest and a better place to build infrastructure that delivers value for taxpayer dollars.
Right. Well, I know there are a number of people who want to take advantage of the break to be able to say hello to both of you and learn more. But let me just say how much I enjoyed this discussion and appreciate you coming and spending some time with us today. Appreciate your efforts to transform your communities, and I know that I speak for a lot of us here in the audience in saying that we hope that we'll have opportunities to work together and support you in what are two very ambitious agendas. So best of luck, and thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank
Jennifer.
you very much.
Great. Thank you.